the microphone. Okay. So first of all, let me express my thanks to the organizers for all they have did for us in the last days, and I hope they will do for us in the upcoming days. And this presentation is an outcome of a project that I have been conducting, not intensively, but continuously over the last years, together with the geologist Stefan Kempe from the Technical University of Darmstadt and my colleague Sandra Kloos from the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna. Next slide. We are working on a critical edition of 2 handwritten travel accounts authored by the court mathematician and naturalist Joseph Anton Nagel around 1750. He was commissioned by Emperor Franz Stephan, the husband of the Austrian sovereign Maria Theresia, to investigate the Habsburg dominions' natural curiosities on site. Since the 19th century, these 2 richly decorated manuscripts containing numerous partly colored ink drawings, maps, and records of collected specimens have been transcribed and translated several times, but only in parts and exclusively into Slovenian. Thus, an overall evaluation of these sources in the international context has not been possible so far. To date, we have already completed the edition and the translation into English, totaling approximately 400 pages in print. However, what is still missing is an introduction to this volume, which we will hope to complete by the middle of next year. Why are these 2 travel accounts of significant interest? Nagel was certainly not a top-ranked scholar, but he was the very first from whom descriptions of caves and karst features from different regions have been preserved, even if these treatises were solely to be read by the emperor and were not published. Since Nagel was at the beginning of state-funded field research in the Habsburg monarchy, his travel accounts can contribute to a better understanding of the nexus of imperial policy and nature research in Central Europe in the 18th century. In an enriching keynote at the recent European Society for the History of Sciences conference in Brussels, Simon Schaffer talked about the 18th century lab and field research, focusing on Britain and France and their colonial empires. According to Schaffer, laboratories served as, quote, colonies of modernity, unquote, while, in turn, colonies served as, quote, laboratories of modernity, unquote. Collecting, surveying, and other fieldwork practices have been used as tools to define and measure deviation from European culture. However, when it comes to the less studied Central Eastern Europe, I'm not sure to what extent we can apply these thoughts. Fieldwork in the 18th century Habsburg monarchy did not take place in colonial settings, even if hierarchies and hegemonic practices of knowledge exchange with the Habsburg dominions prevailed. Power political claims and integrative needs, economic and scholarly aims, state and private interests, enlightenment and Catholicism were not contradictions, but went hand in hand. Nagel's travel accounts developed in a period when political and economic reforms in the Habsburg monarchy, such as the expansion of the state authority, the elimination of intermediary powers between the sovereign and subordinates, and the mobilization of economic resources considerably changed the relationship between state and citizen, public and private. At the same time, imperial practices of rulership formed a long-lasting alliance with useful fields of research. Practical and local knowledge related to mines, resource extraction, and the underground in general became a tool of state governance and was supplemented with knowledge from technicians and naturalists, for example, in mineralogy and chemistry. Turning Vienna into a node of knowledge and power, expanded or newly established bureaucratic bodies, learned institutions, and imperial collections gathered resources through increased exchange relationships with the Habsburg dominions, including Nagel's voyages. My talk builds on the premise that the specific conditions of cave environments, such as the labyrinth's topography, impassability, isolation, and obscurity, gave rise to distinct ways of handling both knowledge and the different kinds of objects found there, such as minerals, fossils, and artifacts. In these underground sites, limited vision presented a challenge to the early modern practice of providing evidence based on experience, casting contemporary cultures of perception into doubt. Describing and mapping subterranean geographies were an important technology of credibility building, even though any such endeavor was founded on non-empirical aspects, such as ambiguity and lack of knowledge. My presentation deals with Nagel's practices and methods, and both in the field and on the paper, with which he faced these challenges and communicated credibility and trust to the emperor. My talk consists of two parts. First, I will provide a bit more context on Nagel's persona as a court-employed scholar engaged in field research, and I will discuss his travels and research objectives. And the second part focuses on his technologies of credibility building, which I will analyze at three interrelated levels: geographies of science, scientific communities, and epistemes involved. Who was Nagel? Nagel was born as a son of a local tax official in Riedberg, today northwest Germany. He attended lectures in mathematics and physics at the Jesuit University in Paderborn and then moved to the University of Vienna. After a few years working as an official in the imperial mining administration in Hungary, he gained access to the close cycle around Franz Stephan, Emperor and Grand Duke of Tuscany, who hired him as a court mathematician. As the Habsburg dominions were ruled by Maria Theresia, Franz Stephan developed a lively interest in natural history, minerals, economics, and mining. He surrounded himself with young, ambitious scholars, especially from Tuscany, and established extensive private collections, so-called imperial cabinets, today the basis of the Vienna Natural History Museum. As a reward for his long-standing service, Nagel was appointed director of the Imperial Physical Cabinet in 1772, and then director of studies at the former Jesuit University in Vienna, which at that time had already been reformed and placed under state supervision. You can see here a picture of lessons of the young Austrian archdukes and the mathematical physical cabinet. In the center, most probably Nagel as their teacher, but it's not 100% sure. He is also known for his detailed survey of Vienna and his published account of an earthquake that occurred in Lower Austria in 1768. In short, Nagel is an early representative of the professional field of scholarly experienced higher state officials, such as the well-known naturalist, mining official, and Freemason Ignaz von Born, who promoted geoscientific field research in the monarchy in the second half of the 18th century. At the beginning of his career, Nagel made several trips for the emperor. The first in 1747 to Lower Austria and Styria, the second in the following year to Carniola and Moravia, and the third in 1751 to Hungary, present-day Slovakia. His travels covered a significant part of the Habsburg dominions, especially those with a vital mining industry, crucial for financing the monarchy and warfare. Nagel's task was always the same: to visit the most exclusive natural rarities of the dominions, to study them with his, quote, own eyes and those of the emperor, to measure and map them in order to distinguish the true from the false, unquote. Actually, Nagel investigated a wide range of natural and cultural sites, including mountains, rock formations, mines, lakes, springs, with subterranean species, prehistoric and historical sites. However, the fact that the vast majority of the objects visited were caves and other karst features were probably due to Nagel's own interest. In his truth hunting, he always proceeded in the same way. Nagel traveled from site to site with an engineer or painter, contacted the local authority, collected information, and went up into the mountains with guides and carriers. These guides, together with the engineer or painter, then measured and documented the objects on site while Nagel took notes. Let's start now with the geographical aspects of credibility building. I will start with this quotation from his travel account, his second travel account. Quote, "It is a most honorable thing that your imperial and royal majesty has most graciously decided to investigate the natural marvels of the dukedom of Carniola, so that one can do away with the large number of so many fabulous and superstitious stories that fill the books and minds of many of the inhabitants of this country and of the traveling foreigners, and that for once an exact description and depiction of the curiosities can differentiate between the true and the false." Unquote. Nagel was not a humble scholar. What he attended was nothing less than an examination of a huge amount of knowledge related to one regions and several regions, some of it already published. In his report to the emperor, he complained notoriously about the simplicity and unreliability of the local population, who preferred knowledge that had been passed on to them to knowledge that had been proved on site. Surprisingly, Nagel did not distinguish between officials or farmers, whose reliably he, by the way, tried to buy with considerable sums of imperial money. This distrust of local knowledge, which should obviously promote Nagel's own trustworthiness, was at odds with the fact that his works also built on local informants. In his so-called experiments, Experimento, Nagel described the adoption of measurement principles and methods from the imperial physical cabinet and their implementation in fieldwork. In deep soundings, in surface and subterranean lakes, he had measurements taken 7 times at different times of one day and at 7 different locations. He even emphasized the necessity that these measurements could be remade. Most impressive is certainly Nagel's chapter on the subsurface water cycle of the periodic lake Zirknitzer in Carniola. To explain the shifting lake level, Nagel no longer used the model of an animated earth with interconnected channels, such as the Carnolian scholar Johann Weichert von Valvassor had used in a letter to the Royal Society in London in 1687. You see this picture of Valvassor's model on the right-hand side, on the left, and on the left it's Nagel's. In contrast, a tool from the cabinet served as an explanatory model whose inlets and outlets Nagel associated with sinkholes, caves, and springs in the surroundings of the lake. Let's move now to the social aspects of credibility building. I start again with a quotation. In the first part of his chronicle, Baron Johann von Valvassor has described so many curiosities and natural marvels that it seems as if not everything that was written later about this county would be superfluous. These and other meaningless ambitions more, with which the easily convincible people here go pregnant with, are the fruits that result from those history books that actually want to praise their fatherland rather than they want to relate the true state and of the curiosities that occur here, unquote. Obviously, the demarcation from other scholars formed an essential element for the re-evaluation of Nagel's own position. Particularly striking is the boundary work with the 17th century naturalist and antiquarian Johann von Valvassor, who, with his 4-volume work, The Honor of the Duchy of Carniola, it was a standard book until the 18th century. It is striking that Nagel, on the one hand, did not omit any opportunity to put emphasis on Valvaso's mistakes, but on the other hand, he took over passages from Valvaso's book without naming him. Nagel also seemed to have intensively read the contemporary literature on paleontological findings and dated the fossils found by him in the Dragon Cave in Styria to living animals before the biblical flood. However, he did not name any reference literature. An important glimpse behind the scenes of Nagel's reports to the emperor is provided by travel notes of local scholars such as the Slovakian scholar Georg Buchholz, who was involved in Nagel's undertakings. While Nagel mostly did not mention his accompanying painter, his guides and carriers, we know from the preserved paintings, the engravings inside the caves visited, and above-mentioned reports of scholarly companions that the parties with which Nagel visited, for example, the Ötscher cave, were large. The non-mention of untrustworthy participants, such as guides, who were, however, substantially involved in the knowledge production process, also represents a method of credibility building towards the emperor. In some cases, Nagel even sent locals to so-called weather holes, Wetterluken, caves with subterranean lakes, to check for connections between their disturbance and extreme weather events outside. While Nagel's guides fired rifle shots into these lakes at certain times over the course of a day, Nagel checked weather conditions in the valley. Let's move now to the last part, to the epistemic aspects of credibility building. Measuring instruments and data. The authority communicated by measuring instruments and data played a decisive role in Nagel's reports to the emperor. However, due to the difficult conditions in caves, it is doubtful whether the variety of instruments depicted in the already shown picture of the mathematical physical cabinet were also used in these ventures by Nagel. Instead, he clearly described the construction of a depth sounder on site, which he used to circumvent the unsuitability of the wood and rope used for this purpose. Data on length, altitude, and direction was mentioned very precisely in Nagel's reports, even though the data obviously not based on evidence and measurements were not even possible. Especially tricky for Nagel was the calculation of the age of dripstones, which led to a result of 100,000 years old speleothems. For this, Nagel had calculated the annual growth rate on the basis of a piece of wood overgrown with dripstone for some years, and was now confronted with the problem that the period of Earth history opening up before him did not correspond with assumed events of the biblical flood. Therefore, Nagel concluded in his report to the emperor that the dripstone growth rate obviously took place very irregularly, and therefore no clear statement is possible. While Nagel in his text clearly distinguished between personal observation and imagination, visual narratives played a central role in the paintings used in his travel accounts. Often, for example, the depiction of documentation practices was combined with artistic elements to develop a more convincing argument and to pick up the reader with his perception expectations. Here, for example, you see the visualization of a dripstone as a swan. In overall, it can be stated that Nagel clearly preferred visual knowledge, either based on his personal observations or conveyed through paintings, to orally transmitted knowledge, which he considered as highly unreliable. In my conclusion, I would like to give you two take-home messages. So my first question is, what challenges did scholars such as Nagel face in dealing with caves and the underground? If we imagine scholars of the early modern world dressed in their court cap, up, crawling on all fours or stuck in pits or being carried piggyback by their guides through wet passages, we can understand the underground as a space in which hypotheses, methods, and instruments face challenges which they might fail. In this sense, I have argued that natural cavities are unique knowledge spaces which in this period required specific strategies for dealing with ambiguity and various levels of scientific practice. Reports, paintings, maps, and the use of surveyors, instruments, and techniques in their creation were key to communicating authenticity and credibility, although the data behind them were at times onerous and prone to epistemic uncertainty. Mountains or lakes are undoubtedly different geographies, but here too, at least in Nagel's case, a struggle with scientific evidence building can be observed. My second question is, how can the scientific credibility building process in Nagel's travel accounts be described? I fear that I have not a final answer yet. In any case, it is a complex interaction of different scientific and social practices that convey trust and familiarity with geographies and related imaginaries. At the same time, as we have seen in the example of Valvasor, processes of demarcation and exclusion played an important role. These were used to portray other scholars negatively and to exclude unreliable contributors from the process of knowledge production. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Johannes, for a really fascinating talk. And now questions or comments from the audience. Martina.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for a really nice talk. Those are the original drawings from those reports, I guess. And I just noticed two of those cave paintings. They seem to be somewhat organic. The holes look like a face, and then there is these bird-like stalactites and so on. Did he say something about that? Is it just the draftsman, or did Nagel actually comment on structures that might look like some organic stuff?
So the interesting thing is that Nagel really makes a distinguishment between paintings and his writings. In his writings, there's no comment at all. And in the paintings, they play a big role. And I mean, the paintings were made for the emperor, so can catch up. He sees things maybe he would like to see, and they are looking brilliant. And it's important to say that there were two different artists involved. The first one was an Austrian one. He did the first travel with him, and the second one was from Italy, and he was much more. The paintings were much more artistic. So in the second time, so that it changed a bit. But in his writings, he never talked about that.
Marianne.
Thank you so much for your inspiring talk and your congratulations to this project, because it's very famous and well known, but not the sources. So you put the finger on very important questions. Thank you for this. I'm only curious, do you find some in your research now? You have the project, which is an editing project, but did you find some other sources? Because except of Valvasor, who is also very well known in Slovenia, he's a national hero. So did you find some other letters? Because this time is not well researched in this interactions at the court or as well.
Actually, I have not found, I mean, there exist no letters from Nagel. That's the problem. But I found publications in French from this time, and they prove that Nagel also sent his travel accounts to France to exchange. So I found some publications, But actually, that's a big problem. I know. Yeah. So we have this travel accounts from his companions, so the Buchholz, but there is not much left, and that's the problem, of course. So it's really it's I think it's a goal of this project to connect this knowledge, which is really, because the problem is also Nagel did not mention a lot of other colleagues. So just Volvasse, and Volvasse was really a guy. He tried, you know, to show that he's better and so on, but there is no other sources. So we have to connect this knowledge with the European knowledge at the time in Britain and France and so on, and that's the difficult thing. So yes, and I don't have a solution right now. It was just the first talk on this, and it's a project which we are conducting, I think now 4 or 5 years, but very slowly. Finally, the edition is done, but the biggest part of the project, to write the introduction, which is the most difficult one, is still ahead. Yeah.
Ernie?
Oh, thank you very much, Johannes. Really enjoyed that talk. And a comment and a question. I mean, I think you're quite right to want to distinguish between different kinds of imperialisms, because overseas empire may work very differently than a contiguous land empire like the Austro-Hungarian. But looking at Nagel, what you say about him, I mean, parts of him do fit very well this metropole periphery kinds of discussion. I mean, the way he treats local sources as disparages local sources, even though he makes use of local informants. So that sort of does fit in very nicely with other ways of doing things in other parts of Europe. My question is related to Martina's, the cave depictions, the first cave depictions. I'm very surprised that, you know, Nagel doesn't comment on these in the text, because, I mean, you're a very experienced spelunker, but that cave depiction, though, 2 of those, there's 3 holes, passageway, and 2 of them look almost perfectly circular. I mean, I've not seen pictures of caves like that. Are there caves like that, or is that in any way a naturalistic depiction?
Actually, this one, it's quite naturalistic.
Okay.
So it's very different. There are the pictures, they are very artistic, and other ones, they are very precise. And it's very difficult also to say in which ventures the painter was with him in the cave. Sometimes we have engravings in the cave, then we know he was with him. But there are other sites where I'm not 100% sure, because Nagel is not talking about that. I only know this from other accounts and so on, from the pictures. Sometimes the painter depicts himself and on the pictures, then it's clear, but it's also not 100% approved. Yeah, approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you very much for your talk and for your presentation. You want the last talk?
Oh, yeah.
Please. See, please. We'll just now.
I just want to do a comment because, of course, this was historically very centered and defined as a specific kind of research. But when we will go to different caves here to see the decorated caves, people will tell you that they were explored long before they were recognized as prehistoric ornated caves. And there are graffitis, there are depictions, there are narratives. And so this is part of what was done with caves, and as a place for study, but also as a place for imagination or fancy, which can include, especially in this region, a vision of things. I mean, these birds, you know, or these shapes, actually, in some caves, they did exist as paintings, or, you know, in France and in this region. So there's something very interesting in this prehistorian vision of the cave that can instruct us about all these travels in caves that were done all through history and didn't see actually them as decorated caves. I don't know if this speaks to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's I never thought about this, but it's very inspiring. And yeah, I mean, you should be very proud that you have so brilliant caves here, you know, with these great paintings. In the Habsburg monarchy, there were none. No, there are no paintings at all.
But they were visited for ages without people seeing
course,
the
of
actual,
course.
or saying about
So we have a lot of engravings, but no paintings. But it's very interesting maybe to see the art in this travel account compared to the ancient art. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.